I'm Erin Turner, the Director of Publications at Far Country Press, and I will be reading the introduction from First Rangers by C.W. Guthrie, The Life and Times of Frank Liebig and Fred Herrig, Glacier Country, 1902 to 1910. Over 100 years ago, a young German came to the United States. He wanted no part of the cities, and acquiring wealth was never his goal. He came to live in the American wilderness. His journey, by necessity, was roundabout, and it took longer than he had wished. But he steadily made his way to the northwest, to the land of the glaciers. This was the land of legend to the people he left behind, and it was the land of his youthful dreams. He climbed the mighty mountains, looked down upon the winding streams and shining lakes and the mountain-girded valleys below. He watched the eagles fly, idled in the sun, and occasionally had a short talk with his maker while he was in the neighborhood. He hunted the woods and fished the streams. At night he took pleasure in supper over an open campfire, and in reading tales from a time-scarred book by the fire's glow. He felt at home in this glacial wilderness. It suited him, and by his reckoning he was welcome in it. He had not been swallowed by a silent waiting glacier, crushed by a falling tree, swatted scentless by a quick-tempered grizzly, or made a meal of by an outlaw lion. On occasion, the wind severely lashed him and the freezing cold hovered about, making ominous threats. But this too, he reckoned, was a form of wilderness hospitality. He followed the trails of elk and deer and sheep and goats and Cree and Blackfeet and Flathead Indians. He traveled over the paths of trappers and explorers and wandering prospectors. And he, as they had, made new trails through the thick forests and rugged mountains. His footprints are there in the hundreds of miles of trails he made from West Glacier to the Canadian border and across the Rockies to St. Mary's Lake. For the time, the man who loved and walked this wilderness was its guardian. Frank Liebig was the first forest ranger assigned to protect the wild and magnificent country of the glaciers from fires, timber thieves, squatters, and game violators. Frank Liebig's comrade, Fred Herrig, was 12 years older than Frank and became a ranger 2 years earlier in the district west of Glacier Country, and he kept a watchful eye on the area until Frank was assigned. Fred was as colorful a character as any in Western lore, and he was a lifelong friend of Theodore Roosevelt. Frank Liebig and Fred Herrig are of that breed of men that Roosevelt described as straight and square and game. Forest rangers were required to keep a journal and make a report once a month. These journals are records of the rangers' daily activities and were sometimes jokingly referred to as liars' diaries. A few early rangers told why. One time, when they were either rained out or snowed in and unable to work, they sent in a report to that effect, then were promptly docked in pay for whatever time they were counted idle, so they never sent in a report like that again. Hail, sleet, snow, or high water, the rangers' journals demonstrated that they worked every day. Most of these journals are sparse in detail, and Frank Liebig's is no exception. Written while in the saddle, riding along the trail, leaning against a tree, or seated at a table in a dimly lit cabin, the journals record what he did, but reveal little detail of the ceaseless labor, often against the raging wrath of nature, that he endured to do it. These daily hardships were matters of routine to these rangers and didn't require much mention. The stories that are passed on in this book, in Frank's words, and the excerpts from his journals, are like him, stern, short on words, and humorously matter-of-fact. Frank Liebig's first child, Jean, lived the first days of her life in this wilderness of the Flathead Forest Reserve. Her life as the child of this rugged ranger in the forests of the Rockies, and later as a rural Montana schoolteacher, is a fascinating piece of Western history. Her story alone is worthy of telling, but she, as loving daughters will, wanted her father's story told, and she and her brother Carl and sisters Margaret and Frances have provided the documents, the pictures, and their own recollections of Frank for this work. While reading through the numerous articles, journals, and letters they provided, I came across a draft of an unpublished biography by Don Bunger. Don met Frank in the summer of 1930 while working for the U.S. Forest Service and was much impressed. He kept notes, and years later he wrote a biography, but never submitted it for publication. Don Bunger wrote about Frank Liebig with the respect one man has earned from another. Fred Herrig's memorabilia was found stored in leather pouches in a shed by Fred's daughter-in-law, Inez Herrig of Libby, Montana. Fred did not save much information about himself. Most of what was found was about Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. This work is written from the letters and journals of Frank Liebig, memorabilia of Fred Herrig, excerpts from the works of Don Bunger, and the memories of Frank's children and Fred's daughter-in-law Inez Herrig, and step-grandchildren Herb Wilkie and Frida Wilkie Miller. Dialogue is derived from Frank and Fred's written accounts or from their stories passed on to their children. Don Bunger gave his reasons for writing his 1950 manuscript about Frank. This work is written for the same reason. These stories are rare bits of history which need to be gathered into one place and preserved for the nature lover, the hunter, the outdoorsman, and the whole population of this great nation. They will never happen again to anyone, for the conditions are not here anymore to produce them.